and Joe, I'm also just gonna give you share screen. And once I do, and then I'm just gonna introduce you and just give me 1 second. Make co-host. Okay. So it is my pleasure to introduce my friend Joe Arguelles. Sorry. He's a third-year PhD candidate at the Richard Gilder Graduate School of at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Prior to graduate school, he received a degree in fine arts/sculpture from the Fashion Institute of Technology, also in New York. And he spent around 2 years working in interior design before returning to school to pursue a Bachelor's of Science in Biology at the Brooklyn College. During his undergraduate studies, he worked under the advisement of Dr. Shaneen Singh to investigate the structural biology of parasitoid wasp venoms. Currently at AMNH, he is pursuing his PhD under the advisement of Dr. Cheryl Hayashi, studying the evolution of spiders, and his dissertation, tentatively titled Diversification of Araneomorph Spider Venom and Silk Systems in Response to Active Hunting, Foraging, and Web Transitions, seeks to investigate the changes to the gene composition of spider silk and venom systems within the context of shifts towards and away from web spinning behavior, and how these molecular structures of these genes may impact performance of dragline spiders. But his talk today is going to focus on spiders commonly encountered in the Northeast US, including the basics of spider identification, spider silk use, and web architecture. And a portion of this talk is also going to focus on how hunting strategies of spiders, with a specific focus on Lepidoptera defenses against capture, and how some spiders have even overcome these defenses. And with that, Joe, I'm turning everything over to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so like Jen said, this is a talk that's a little bit different than the talks I usually do, because usually people come in and they're like, talk about your work, talk about proteins, talk about genes. So this was a lot more fun to put together for me, which is nice, a nice change of pace. But so I'm going to jump right in. So thanks, Jen. I am Joe Arguelles. I'm from the American Museum of Natural History, where I'm pursuing my PhD in comparative biology. So I'm lucky in that this is my office, essentially. It's a big, beautiful building, and I'm one of the few people in the world who gets to say that within my office building, I have dinosaurs, I have elephants, I have a giant blue whale. So this is actually where the commencement ceremony will take place. Am I to graduate with my PhD? I don't work with any of these animals, however. As Jen mentioned, I work with spiders. So I was a weird kid growing up who loved spiders, and I'm a weird adult who still loves spiders and has devoted probably the rest of my life to studying these really, really cool creatures. I know they can be quite polarizing as animals, so some people really love spiders and other people really hate them, but I'm hoping by the end of this talk that you guys will at least appreciate them a little bit more. I think a good place to start with spiders and talking about just how cool they are is to orient ourselves temporally. So this is Eoraptor. It's considered, as per my Google search when I put this talk together, one of the earliest dinosaurs that we know of. So this dinosaur occurred in the Triassic, which is about 200 million years ago. For perspective, spiders occurred in the Devonian period about 400 million years ago. So spiders are about 200 million years older than dinosaurs. These are ancient, ancient, ancient animals. And if you look at these fossils of old ancient spiders, you'll see that their body plans actually have not changed that much from the time that we first started to see them in the fossil record up through the extant or current groups that we have these days. And this is because they're very good at what they do, and they've been very good at what they do for a very long time. And so from this point, 400 million years ago, spiders have diversified extremely well. You get all kinds of crazy spiders. So in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, we have a pelican spider who's chelicerae, where the fangs are gotten very, very long and are used sort of like chopsticks to grab prey from a distance. You have spiders with weird defense mechanisms, like cartwheeling downhill away from predators or burying themselves in the sand. You have spiders that have learned to take debris, dirt, leaf, litter, and weave it into their webs to create fake spiders, so predators will attack that instead of the spider itself. And then you have spiders who've evolved to look like other animals or twigs, some of which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So in total, currently, there are 50,000 species of spiders. And this is so far. So this is a big caveat, the so far. So every year, a couple hundred to 1,000 species of spiders are being discovered. I gave this very similar talk 2 years ago, and this number was 48,000 species. So it is a rapidly developing field of study. If you're really into the concept of like finding a new species and naming a new species, spiders are a great group to work with because we have a ton of stuff out there to still discover. But for the sake of this talk, I'm going to simplify this tree into the groups Megalomorphae, the Eudograde, which is Eulaborids, Dinopids, Osabids, and Hercillidae, I think is the H. The Araneoidea, which are the silk spinning spiders. When you think of your sort of your stereotypical spider, this is the group they belong to. And then the RTA clade, which is a personal favorite of mine. And these are spiders who have developed web spinning and then abandoned it about 200 million years ago. For context, this is where the aerial foraging web is going to develop. So the Megalomorphae, that's tarantulas and things like trapdoor spiders. These are considered older spiders, and they have an earlier body plan. So these are heavy-bodied spiders that tend to dwell on the ground and don't really use their silk for very much. Then you have the development of the aerial foraging web, and every other spider are considered true spiders, the Araneomorphae. So the megalomorphs, I talked about them having the older body plan. And this is because they are strange older spiders. And so a key diagnostic between a megalomorph spider and an araneomorph spider is going to be the position of the chelicerae. So this is where the body part just above the mouth where the fangs are located. So in a megalomorph spider, like a tarantula, the chelicerae are going to come straight down parallel to each other. And this is because their venom glands are actually stored in the chelicerae themselves. And so when they push down, it's going to apply pressure and be able to inject the venom. Now, araneomorphs, like this jumping spider here, needed to sort of reposition the glands inside of their body. And this is because in order to move up off of the ground and start living in webs, they had to shrink their body size down, but they still had to maintain things like venom glands and now make room in their abdomens for many, many new and differentiated silk glands. And so when this happened, this venom glands actually moved out of the chelicerae and back into the cephalothorax. So this is the head and thorax combined. Spiders have two body parts as opposed to the three in insects. And when this happened, the position of the chelicerae actually changed. And so when an araneomorph spider closes its chelicerae, they come in at an angle and sort of touch or cross over when closed, as in the bottom pictures there. So megalomorphs, I talked about their silk. They don't really use it for anything. This is a non-specialized, non-sticky, very brittle silk that is only really used for creating egg cases and lining their burrows. So in the top right here, we have a trapdoor spider, which is arguably the coolest kind of megalomorph. And these are spiders that not only build a burrow and line the edges with silk, but they create a cap out of silk that they use to hide themselves, and they'll lay silk tripwires along the outside edges of this cap. When an insect touches one of those tripwires, the spider knows which direction to strike to grab the prey. So that's pretty cool. But overall, the silk use is not really for much other than getting around on the ground and living underground. Now, in the Northeast US, we don't have a ton of megalomorphs. They're more as well associated with the tropics and with places like Australia, but we do have this guy, the black purseweb spider. And they get their name from the shape of the enclosures they build. So they build these sort of tubular structures that they live inside of that are the purse of the purse web. And this is very similar to the sort of burrows you'd see in a trapdoor spider. They're just not underground. It's usually up the side of a tree or a plant. In terms of identification, you can look at the chelicerae. That's a clear giveaway. You can look at the web architecture. But they're pretty easy to identify because they look like a tiny tarantula, essentially. And we don't have tarantulas up here. So if you see a small black tarantula, it's probably one of these guys. So from here, we move into the Araneomorphae, the true spiders. And so this is where you have the development of a ton of new silk glands and silk gland types and silks. And because of all of these new silks and silk glands, these spiders are able to make a ton of different kinds of webs. And so these webs are all sort of loosely associated with different groups of spiders. And so if you become acquainted with the kinds of webs that you see in an area, you can get an idea for the spider biodiversity in that area as well. So you have the standard orb webs, which would be like letter E here. You have the funnel webs and A, those are going to belong to things like grass spiders or other RTA spiders, and then cobwebs, tangle webs, so on and so forth. And so we'll touch on a few of these different kinds of webs, different kinds of spiders, and start to get to know our neighbors in the Northeastern US. Another way that we use, another thing we use to identify spiders, and I won't be talking about this very much because unless you're very keen on getting up close and personal with the spiders, this is something you probably yourself will not be using, but eye pattern is a very good diagnostic for identifying spiders down to family. So there are lots of charts available out there where you can find these different eye patterns and use them as a key. And if you don't mind getting up close, or if you can get a good enough picture of the eyes, you can actually be very, very confident about your spider identification down to the level of family. You'll see in some of these, let me see if I can grab the highlighter, or I mean the laser pointer. In some of these, like these two up here, you see these really big forward-facing eyes. These are going to be the groups like Lycosidae and Salticidae that are actively hunting with vision. And so they've developed very large forward-facing eyes. So from here, we're actually going to jump way down to the RTA. Usually I do this talk in a slightly different order, but because I want to close on the sort of Lepidoptera, since this is a butterfly group, I flipped things around a little bit. RTA is a really cool group. So these are araneomorphs. So their ancestor did spin aerial foraging webs. But this group of spiders has decided that they do not want to use the webs anymore. And so about 200 million years ago, all of these spiders stopped spinning aerial foraging webs and decided to hunt actively on their own. And this is sort of weird on its own because, spider webs were so big in terms of the diversification of spiders as a group. However, RTA sort of hints that maybe spider webs are not the be-all end-all for spider diversification because this happens to be the most species-rich group of spiders. So these guys are webless hunters. These are things like jumping spiders, crab spiders, wolf spiders, which we'll all talk about. And sort of like the megalomorphs, their silks are not really used for much beyond building retreats and egg sacs. The one difference being that they are also going to use their silks for getting around. And these are dragline silks. These are the things I study for my dissertation. If you see a spider hanging down from the ceiling, this is the kind of silk we're talking about. Very cool silk, incredibly strong. Actually tougher by weight than things like Kevlar and high tensile steel. So it is a really phenomenal material. So these guys are going to actively hunt. They're going to be using vision, planning in the cases of certain salticids, in order to hunt down their prey, locate them, and pounce unseen. So jumping spiders are my favorite. I refer to these guys as gateway spiders. So they do jump, which freaks people out when they first hear it. Sometimes they're like, what do you mean it jumps? They do jump, but they're typically very small. And I think they're incredibly cute little spiders. They have these big sort of baby doll eyes and often do these really elaborate courtship dances and things like that. So very, very cute little spiders. We'll talk about Salticus senecis first. This is the zebra jumper. So this is very common up in the Northeast. They're incredibly small, so sort of hard to see sometimes, but you can often find them running up walls. So for jumping spiders, because they are diurnal, this means they do their hunting and come out during the day. You'll often find them out in the bright sunlight looking for prey. Salticus senecis is really cool because 2 years ago, they did a study on their silk. So jumping spiders and other RTA spiders were assumed to have very poor silk in terms of its material quality. But this study found that when these spiders are jumping, the silk actually has different tensile properties than the silk they leave behind themselves when they're walking. And the jump silk actually tested as well in terms of the toughness score as the best silks that we know of so far, hinting that there may be more to the story than just the silk proteins themselves when it comes to the mechanical properties of the fibers. Phidippus audax is a cutie. You can find them, and very quickly identify them because they have the bright metallic chelicerae. So these are either going to be a blue or a green, typically in males, and sometimes to a magenta in the females. These guys will be a lot easier to see because they have this really bold black and white body, and they're also the largest jumping spider that we have in the Northeastern US. So these guys are going to be about the size of a thumbnail. So they're quite large for jumping spiders. And then Murmurarachne formicaria. So this is a really cool jumping spider that has actually evolved to mimic physically ants and live within ant colonies in order to feed on their larvae. And so this is one little picture, and I'm going to give him another slide because the mimicry is actually really phenomenal. Down to the fake eye spots that mimic the ant eyes. These are actually a pair of the spider's eyes that have been pushed backwards on the head in order to place them where you would anticipate an ant's eye. And they actually will take their first pair of legs and hold it out in front of their bodies to mimic the antenna of the ant and interact with other ants when they're infiltrating the nests. So really, really wild strategy. These are very small. I have a picture of one over here, but I have seen them in Northeastern US, typically early to midsummer. These guys will be out and about. So if you see ants running around, maybe get a little closer, see if maybe one of those ants is not actually an ant. Crab spiders are another really cool spider. These guys are all over. You can really easily find them if you take a net, like a sweep net, and start sweeping along the tops of flowering plants, because these spiders use camouflage and ambush to capture their prey. So they're going to sit and wait either on the underside of a leaf or a petal or within a flower for a pollinator to pop by, and then the spiders are going to pounce on the pollinator as soon as it gets within reach, making these spiders really, really effective hunters and often taking dangerous prey like bees and wasps. Wolf spiders are another common RTA spider. So this is the rabid wolf spider, one of the most common in this area. This is Rabida rabidosa. These do have the big forward-facing eyes like the celticids and this nice stripe. What they do not have is the diurnal behavior. So if you want to find these spiders, it would be out probably when you guys are looking for moths, if you do the big white sheet with the light shining on it to attract the moths, because these guys are nocturnal. Some cool fun facts about wolf spiders that you may or may not know: they carry their egg sacs around them after spinning, and then the mother will actually carry the baby on her backs for on their back for the first few stages of life. I think I saw a shudder, which is very exciting for me. But yeah, so horrifying if you're a person who does not like spiders. I love it. I think it's very adorable. And it actually gets even cooler because when I'm out hunting these spiders, I actually do it through wearing a headlamp because their eyes are going to reflect light. And this is not something that happens in all spiders. It happens in wolf spiders, it happens in fishing spiders and a few other groups. This is also something that I believe happens in maybe not all moths, but at least to some of them. And so when you have your headlamp on, if you're just looking around outside down at the grass, you'll see what looks like a bunch of glitter in the grass. And if you get closer, it's going to be one of these ladies. If you do happen to get lucky or unlucky enough to find a mother with the babies on her back, all of their eyes are going to reflect light as well. So she's going to look like a little disco ball or a very expensive piece of jewelry. So this is a very fun activity if you have kids that aren't scared of spiders. If you are scared of spiders, I'm going to strongly recommend you do not do this because you will never leave the house after dark again. They really are everywhere. So now we're going to move into the Eudograde. So unfortunately, the guy we see there, the net casting spider, does not occur in the Northeastern US. They do occur in Florida, very cool spiders. But we have arguably an equally cool spider that I'll touch on a bit later. This is going to be an area where you first have these sticky capture silks evolving. So not quite the same sticky capture silks that we're used to in the araneoid spiders, but like the araneoids, they're going to use their silks now for building webs, for capturing prey, for wrapping prey, for moving around, for egg sacs. All of a sudden, silks are used for a whole ton of stuff. So in the case of the Eudograde, they have what's called a cribbolate silk. So this is actually a dry, sticky silk. And what they do is they take a bunch of tiny spigots, hundreds and hundreds of spigots on this one part of their body called the cribellum. And as they pull the silk, they're going to take comb-like structure on their legs and brush the silk as it comes out to puff it up. When a prey item like this fly touches the silk, it's actually going to adhere to the fly sort of like Velcro, or like a tangle to the hairs on the body. There has recently been a study that looked at the chemical interactions here and found that there may be a chemical reaction where the fibers of the silk are actually melding in to the waxy coat on the cuticle of the insect. But right now it's just like 1 or 2 papers looking at this. But if so, that would be like a very crazy, crazy cool type of silk. We do, however, have Hyptioides cavatus, which is in the Eudograde. This is a Euloborid, fun fact, the one family of spiders that does not possess venom glands. So these are very, very safe to get up close and personal with. They cannot envenomate if they wanted to. They're also known as a slingshot spider. And so this is because of the way they use their web. They actually spin a reduced orb web. So instead of spinning the full orb spiral, they're going to spin just a small triangular section of the orb web. And then they take a strand of silk and they pull this web back at tension and they hold it and they wait. And so the fibers of this web can actually hear the vibrations of flying prey. And when they feel or hear a prey item getting close, they're going to release the tension on that silk and actually slingshot themselves forward to ensnare the prey. I have seen these out near Rutgers campus, so they are around in New Jersey. Typically, you'll find them sort of in low light, so dawn and the evening, and they're quite small, so might be hard to see. Luckily, their webs, this triangular sort of orb web, is very, very different from a lot of the other webs you're going to find. So if you do find one, you'll know right away that it's one of these guys. Then finally, we'll talk about the Araneoidea. This is a group that I work with a lot. If you're picturing sort of your standard silk spinning spider, it's probably going to fall within this group. And this is going to be the orb weavers, things like black widow spiders, which I work with in the lab. And luckily, we don't have really here. You might run into one occasionally, but not as common as up farther north or down further south. And so in this group, you have this hyper diversification of silk glands. So an individual araneoid spider can have up to 7 different types of silk glands. Each of the silk gland is going to produce a different set of proteins that are spun into a different kind of silk fiber that are used for a different sort of purpose. An example would be here in brown, we have the cylindrical or piriform glands, or tubuliform glands. And this is actually going to be used to make the tough outer lining of an egg sac. We have in pink down here, this is the major ampulate gland, which will produce the fibers that are used for the drag line, which is the silk for getting around, and also the main structure of the orb web. And then things like the flagelliform glands, which is in the green here, which is used to make the physical spiral of the capture spiral on the web. And then in light blue, the aggregate glands to make the glue droplets. So this is sort of this crazy evolutionary system where not only is an individual spider producing a ton of silk, but it's producing many, many different kinds of silk from many, many different kinds of specialized glands. For perspective, if you do go out and you find an orb web like this, it's actually made of 5 different kinds of silk. So you have the dragline fiber or the major ampulate silk I talked about that make the main structure and the radial spokes of the web. They will then use a piriform, which is sort of like a cement-like silk, to attach the web to a substrate or to strengthen joints within the web itself. Then they lay down a test spiral or a guide spiral with minor ampulate, which goes this way. And then they're going to follow that minor ampulate fiber in the opposite direction and lay down the flagelliform capture spiral, which is lined with droplets of aggregate glues. And so it's a very, very complex process that involves tons of different glands and tons of different silks. Cool thing about spiders, they never learn to do this. There's no instruction from the parents. They're born, they hatch out of the egg, and they start spinning these webs almost immediately. And so these guys use a wet silk. This is the aggregate glue droplets that I was talking about. This is them under a scanning electron microscope. And so it is a single fiber of flagelliform with these sort of viscous, liquidy glue droplets all along, dotted along the silk fiber. And these act like a sticky glue, and that's what's going to capture the prey when it comes in contact with the web. So orb weavers are pretty standard. These guys, they make those big, beautiful sort of Halloween decoration-esque webs. And down here, we have the Arguelles arancha. This is the largest bodied orb weaving spider we have here in the Northeastern US, sometimes also called a yellow and black garden spider or a wasp spider. And they are pretty well identifiable, one, by their striking black and white, or yellow and black colors on their abdomen. And then also they spin what's called a stabilimentum, which you can see at the bottom here. And this is this really strong zigzag down the center of the web. Over here, we have Araneus diatomatus. This is the cross orb weaving spider, which is identified by the little cross on the dorsal side or back side of the abdomen. These are also super common spiders in the area. I didn't want you to think that all of our orb weaving spiders up here are sort of standard boring spiders. So this is the castleback orb weaver, and they're actually everywhere up here, which I think is really cool. And they have these really, really elaborate abdomens that are formed into these sort of black and white spiky nonsense. And these guys are kind of dotted all over in the Northeastern US. Woolen doily spiders are another spider that you'll probably encounter up here. These guys are incredibly tiny and are interesting because it's one of the most species-rich groups of the araneoid spiders. So not much work has been done on these spiders because their bodies are so tiny. It's hard to extract enough tissue to do any sort of genetic analysis. And the silk isn't particularly good or particularly bad, so not many people have looked at the mechanical properties of the silk fibers. But they actually spin really, really pretty webs. And so the reason they're called the bowl and doily spider is because they spin this bowl out of silk, and then they spin a mat or a doily underneath it. And so the spider, and some of these webs can actually get like quite large, so a couple feet across, despite the fact that it's from one very, very tiny spider. And so what the spider is actually going to do here is they live on the underside of this bowl, and then they wait for prey to fall on the doily underneath, and they snatch the prey from above. So I think these spiders are quite funny because the life strategy seems just so wasteful in terms of silk compared to most spiders. So I don't totally understand what evolution was doing here. But it does give us some very nice webs to look at. So I'm appreciative from that aspect. We'll talk about next this guy. These are the Leucaugi venusta, or the orchard orb weaver, very easily identified by their sort of candy striped abdomen with this bright orange spot on the ventral or underside. And so these guys belong to a group called Tetragnathidae, which do spin your sort of stereotypical orb web, but they spin it on a horizontal plane instead of a vertical plane. I tried to find a good picture of the horizontal web and I just could not. But we can see sort of here some of the web to prove that the spider is laying this way. These guys you're going to find sort of tucked away inside of bushes a lot of the time, with the web sort of spanning between sparse areas within the bush. And they're very, very, very tiny. These are like tip of a pencil tiny spiders. And so I'm going to pause for a second here because you're all butterfly people and the next photograph might be a little jarring. This is a wasp spider with a butterfly in its web. And some of you may be a little surprised to see it because this is actually something that doesn't happen that often for butterflies. They're actually very well equipped to not get captured in spider webs. And this is because their wings are covered in scales. And so when their scales do get stuck to the spider web sticky glue, they can actually just sort of peel the scales off and wiggle themselves out of the web. And so this is over evolution. The scales have been used for many different things, but this is a very good defense mechanism against a huge predator of insects. However, some spiders have managed to take this defense mechanism and turn it against the Lepidoptera. And so this is a bolus spider. If you're someone who studies spiders and silk and capture behavior, this is a spider that's very, very interesting. If you're someone who studies butterflies and moths, this spider is your worst nightmare. So they've actually reduced their webs. They've decided that they're almost like an RTA spider. They're going to stop spinning these large elaborate webs. And instead, they spin a single strand of thread with a gigantic glob of the aggregate glue at the end. And so some analysis have hinted at this glob may actually have chemicals in it that mimic the pheromones of certain kinds of moths in order to attract the moth into thinking that it's a mate. But so what the spider is going to do is it's going to use it sort of like a fishing line. And as the moth gets close, it's just going to swing its leg and swing the sticky glob of glue at the moth and grab it right out of the air. And you may be thinking, why don't the scales on the moth's wings just pull off and the moth flies away? And that's because this glue is actually so perfectly developed to interact with the wasp scales that it's going to be wicked through and underneath the scales of the moth or butterfly by capillary action. So this is the same sort of process that plants use to uptake water from the soil. And essentially, it's just going to be such a perfectly viscous fluid that when it hits the scales, these little coils on the scales and the little areas underneath are going to create tiny, tiny, tiny little areas of lower pressure. And this liquid or sticky substance of glue is going to start moving through the scales and then be pulled underneath them. And so this group of spiders have actually perfectly adapted this glue droplet in order to adhere to Lepidopteran wings. And so here I'll leave it. I'll open it for questions. I have no idea if I'm over, under, I don't know, but thanks. We can have some pictures of cute spiders. It's the Hawaiian happy-faced spider. It's real. It has a smiley face on its butt. And it was the inspiration for Spinnerack, the Pokemon, which is not real, but also has a smiley face on its butt. And then there's a QR code. If anyone's interested, it will redirect you to a Spotify playlist that is spider themed, in case you're a music person like me. So from here, I'm happy to take questions. You can ask about pretty much anything. I'm down to talk spiders. I'm down to talk grad school, museums, butterflies.
That was really interesting. So you're holding a lot of these spiders and you're saying that they do have venom. So do you get bit a lot or?
No, almost never actually. So I've been bit by a spider exactly one time, and it was when I was a small child. I was pulling a spider out of a puddle and it bit me. And I assume now as an adult that the spider probably thought I was trying to eat it. But no, they're very, very gentle animals. This one that I'm putting on my face here, Trichonephila clavipes from Florida. These are like very docile spiders. These are the one, I think the only ones in the lab that I'd put on my face. And part of that is because when they're not on their webs, they're actually really, really terrible at walking. So their third pair of legs is reduced. We're not really sure why. But what happens is when they're walking on ground instead of on the webs, they just sort of stumble around like a little drunk person. And so here it's doing an okay job because it's using my facial hair as a pseudo web, but clumsy little spiders. The only dangerous spider we have in the lab right now is the black widows. That was the first project of mine when I started grad school. I was there for about a week. My advisor sent me an email that was, hey, we just got 15 black widow spiders in from California. Can you put them into move them from their tubes into new enclosures for me? And I was like, yeah, I'll get right on it. I'm happy to handle 17 or 15 black widow spiders my first day on the job. We can do this. And the black widows are also pretty docile unless they're hungry. I do not take them out and put them on my face though. I do sometimes put them in little vials to bring to talks or to show kids when they're around. But the black widows get a little bit of extra care. I would love to work with really dangerous stuff though.
One other question.
Yeah.
You mentioned are all wolf spiders nocturnal?
So that you can find them out during the day, but typically they're nocturnal. Yeah. So you might find one walking around or trapped somewhere. A big thing that happens with wolf spiders is you find them in sinks and bathtubs. And that's because their legs, their feet aren't actually equipped to climb slick surfaces. So they go in because they sense like higher humidity or water, and then they get trapped in the porcelain because they can't climb their way out.
I asked because when we were on Snake Road, besides looking at snakes, we were also looking at salamanders. So we were flipping rocks, and I seemed to have a tendency to flip rocks that had what I was told were wolf spiders underneath.
Yeah, so if you're flipping rocks, you can encounter them during the day because they'll be under there hiding until nighttime when they come out to actually start hunting. You'll also sometimes find them in like old logs and things like that, in little alcoves and trees.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I remember being in Guyana at one of the
Hmm.
lodges with my headlamp on, and I thought thousands and thousands of spiders in the grasses. It was amazing.
Yeah, it really does look like someone threw glitter all over the ground. It is, like I said, if you're a person who thinks spiders are cool, great experience. If you're a person who doesn't think spiders are as cool, it is a less great experience.
I had a kind of a general question.
Sure.
Well, for instance, like in my house, there'll be some spiders sometimes, and they'll be descending on a single bit of silk. And then if I like blow on them or something or disturb them, they'll take the silk back up and then go back up to the ceiling. Is the silk going back into the glands, or are they using their arms to take up the silk? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, so when they reascend the drag line, typically what they'll do is they'll sort of just gather it as they go up. And then when they get back to wherever they're going, they'll actually eat it to recycle the proteins and the amino acids in the proteins.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of eating of the silk. Some of the Arguelles spiders, but they'll take down their silks at night because they don't catch as much prey, and they'll ingest the silk when they take it down and then rebuild the webs the next day.
Yeah, like the bowl and doily spiders that you say are so small. How many days would it take for them to build one of those elaborate, giant, several feet across structures?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure. I don't know if anyone's looked at times for spinning. They can spin quite quickly though. Typically a spider will spin the web in a single sitting. Something that large though might take them a few hours to complete, or the majority of the day, maybe, depending on the spider. But they're very small spiders. Like when you eventually see them, now that your eyes will just sort of automatically spot the webs. When you do see them out there, you'll be surprised at just how small these spiders are and how big the webs are for such a small spider.
How do they have enough room in their bodies to contain all that silk? If they're just doing it like in a few hours.
Yeah, so in the body, the silk is actually stored as like a liquid dope. And the proteins are sort of being generated as the silk is needed or as it's depleted from the gland. And so it's a very metabolically expensive process. So it takes a lot of energy to maintain the silk systems because it's constantly pumping out proteins as the silks are being used. But it's sort of just like, as long as the spider is well fed, it's more or less like a never-ending supply of the silk.
Wow. Thank you.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do spiders cooperate and make extra large webs?
So
okay, go ahead. You can answer that first part.
No,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, so typically no. But there are, I think it's like one or two groups of spiders that will live communally. And they don't necessarily spin webs, I guess, together, but they do spin their own webs and join their individual webs into large webs.
No, I was wondering because I have seen some really large webs in warmer climes like Florida. And I didn't know if they were communal or and how they allocated the resources of what was caught. But their individual webs just happen to be close together.
Yeah, it's probably the latter. The guys that I'm putting on my face in this video that's looping, they actually spin very, very large webs. So like 5 by 5, 5 foot by 5 foot webs. So they're pretty huge. Very easy, makes them very, very easy to spot. But yeah, so some spiders will build gigantic webs. These spiders are actually quite difficult in the lab because we can't allot every spider 25 square feet. And so we put them in smaller enclosures, and a lot of the times because they don't have the space they want, they just won't spin a web at all. They'll refuse. But yeah, they're good spiders otherwise. Oh, and they don't eat when I want them to. But otherwise, other than those two things, they're good spiders. Like poorly behaved children.
Joe, this doesn't have to do with webs, but when the female that carries the many babies on her back, how do the little ones feed? Do they leave her body to go and feed themselves and then come back, or
So it's sort of,
eat?
there's like a two-step process. Part of it is nice and sweet, and part of it gets a little grisly. Sweet. So they at first they're called what's called eggs with legs, because they still have all of the big like egg yolk attached to them. They're very silly looking, and so what they're doing there is they're still living off of the nutrients from the egg. After that, they'll start to cannibalize before they disperse, and so they're probably eating each other when they're hungry, and then the handful that make it to the final stage before dispersal will sort of just run about on their merry way. And if they're not fast enough, the mom will eat them.
Thank you.
So it's sort of good maternal care up to a point.
Interesting.
Any other questions for Joe?
Just one about the AMNH, the new edition. Are there going to be spider exhibits in that on the Columbus Avenue side there?
So I don't know exactly. I do know that our lab was photographed for something, so I'm hopeful. It will have an insectarium portion, which I'm excited about. That they've been working in the collections now, a few of my colleagues, to start picking what specimens they're going to have out there on display. And there's a rumor, I don't know how true this rumor is, that the top floor is actually going to be sort of like a year-round butterfly conservatory. So I am hoping that's true, because that would be a great place to spend my breaks. But we'll see. Definitely an insectarium, maybe a butterfly conservatory. Hopefully spiders. If there aren't any spiders, I will throw a fit and I'll get spiders there.
Yeah, just keep them out of the butterfly conservatory, okay?
I'll do my best.
Anybody else? That was a really good presentation. Thank you so much.
I'm
Yeah,
good.
thank you, Joe. That was a great information.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thanks. And of course, feel free to reach out if you have more spider questions at some point.
Do you
I'm
have
very-
an email that, or can we get an email from Jen and put in our next newsletter?
Yeah, that would be perfectly fine. It's just jarguelles@amnh.org, so pretty standard, but Jen is, yeah, you can email that out.
Great.
And if you have any questions or about the museum or whatnot, you feel free to email.
Excellent. Jen, if you're there, maybe we can get everyone back on the screen. I could just see if anyone has anything else for the good of all. There we go.
Yes, just 1 second. Let me just hit stop recording.